Nudd. Welcome to
Hey, Katie.
What's the Word? This is really a forum all about separating myth from magnetic when it comes to reputation building and influence. This is meant to be a space for support, experience swapping, and the sanity checks storytellers need every now and then. So again, Tim, creativity editor at Ad Age. I like to say though that you are a one of a kind entity in our industry, a journalist. Yes, I know you got an early start as editor in chief of your student paper. I too.
Yeah. Shout out
But
Studley.
yeah, but you are a student of the industry. What you created in the pandemic with the Tagline podcast, and just how we got to see the people in the industry celebrate and reflect on the work was so special. And you spent time at Adweek, Muse by Clio, and now Ad Age. So as we kind of talk about big game, because it's time, it feels early, but it's not at all. Do you feel like there's been an evolution in how you approach covering big game campaigns, what you admire, what you look for, what stands out to you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if I look back at the real big picture, the evolution of of Super Bowl campaigns themselves has obviously changed so much, and so the coverage of those campaigns is, very different. I think the biggest thing is, there's so many teasers now. There's so many sort of weeks and weeks ahead, sometimes even after the game. There's just a much more 360 kind of approach to Super Bowl campaigns. And I think that's even picked up, I think, in the last couple of years. Like Sarah V was a good example. So I feel like we are trying to cover as much of that as we can while also trying to keep an eye on, we don't want to flood the zone so much. Like there's so much we could be covering. And I think we can't do individual story on everything. Not every teaser is going to get its own story. And, you've got 60 plus marketers sort of all jostling for attention. And it's a difficult time. It's a fun time for us because it's a time of year that everyone cares about advertising, but it's also pretty overwhelming, and the strategies that we have for dealing with the avalanche of stuff is always evolving for sure.
Yeah, and to the avalanche, you guesstimate like how many emails do you think you receive in the fire hose of big game, like a day or in a week?
Well, I think I'm lucky now here at Ad Age because we've got reporters that have relationships with certain brands. We've got reporters covering certain categories, Erica in particular, who covers food and beverage. So many food and beverage marketers, obviously, on the Super Bowl. So she is writing, nonstop, I think, from like mid-January to mid-February. So, I have some relationships with certain brands or certain agencies, and it's nice to split it up that way. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that we've had as an option lately, we have our daily creativity roundup, which is an interesting place for us to put teasers and things like that. So we don't have, we no longer have the difficult question of like, do we cover this teaser as a full story or do we not cover it? Now we've got a third option, which is let's put it in a roundup and see, people can sort of find things there. So, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lot. We're all super busy during that time. But it's, we prioritize it as well. So, anything that comes in around Super Bowl gets our attention, certainly.
Yeah, I remember that first year, and poor gal Snack Bowl and her beat or said, "How's it going?" She just went, "Woo." So yeah, I totally get it. The one word responses are always the most true to the reality. So be kind to your journalist listeners. Um, any old big game spots you wish you could go back and dig deeper into the story behind the effort, as I know you have with some.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did this. You mentioned tagline, and we did this later on, which was, revisiting the Volkswagen Star Wars ad. I think at the time we didn't really realize how big that was in terms of media decision. I mean, obviously everyone was kind of shocked that that came out early. That was like basically the first Super Bowl ad ever to be pre-released. The story behind that was super fascinating, it turned out, and no one really had that story at the time. So that was interesting. Um, I think that there was probably around the same time, like 2011, 2012, there was just a lot of like classic spots came out around that time. It's kind of a golden age for online video, which was part of it. So nowadays, I think it's just much more fractured, and the strategies are much more, like I said before, a bit more complex. And it's great to have someone like Jillian on staff at Ad Age who can really dig into what's happening in social with creators. Garrett as well and his team. Like I feel like we have a good team in place to sort of examine all facets of a Super Bowl campaign nowadays. So that's nice. But I mean, yeah, any number of classic Super Bowl campaigns. I would love to go back and report them differently now, knowing what we know today. But
Yeah, I even think, doing the heaviest lift of Super Bowl that I've done, which like, nefarious maybe, but FTX's Super Bowl spot, I think like getting past that moment and being able to look back on it just in the heart of the pandemic, that like what we just like didn't realize beyond the work itself is like for many people it's like the first time you met your team in person. And
Mhm.
I'm the shortest person ever, and the whole team are giants, so our necks are hurting by the end of the day because I'm looking up
Mhm.
so high and they're looking down so much. But to do something like Super Bowl and like be learning people in real time and that kind of in real life ways of working, and all the set parameters of things, like I think in LA it was like 3 strikes and you're out on like COVID tests.
Sure.
And I think on the last day, I mean, it was at 2. So it was just like, are we gonna make it? You just don't know. So like I look back at that time with like fond but also heart palpitation memories of
That's,
those things. I think
that's
I'm certain that one day you have to do the story of like stupid things people have done while working Super Bowl. Like I fully confess that I got a note for jury duty and I had sent like a written note trying to defer, but at the time I didn't know if the spot would be pre-released or not. So it was just kind of like thumb in the wind of when I need to be, and they deferred, but it wasn't the time I needed. And a meeting ran late. I didn't make my call. I was like crying, calling the clerk's office to say, like, I'm so sorry.
Mhm.
Everything's so busy. And for a week, my husband and I would just be looking out our window as cars drove by, thinking, like, would I be arrested? Would I get fined? All of those things. Your brain goes in a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
Um, so then a lot of brands are already in the thick of that March to game day. So how do you think recent reactions to casting and messaging and the work from American Eagle, Dunkin', and now Elf Cosmetics will play into what we'll see from brands? Is it going to be Safegate?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like, you know, we sort of learned this along the way. I think it's hard to predict what the atmosphere is going to be. I think there's a few different trends happening right now, which is I do think that there's a bit of a return to kind of escapism and playfulness, humor being kind of a part of that. We saw that last year. I think we'll see that again. I mean, the state of the world is quite stressful, so Super Bowl itself is meant to be sort of a night where, people can smile and have fun. I think spectacle, comedy, all that stuff will be back. Um, Things like the American Eagle situation certainly will probably remind marketers that they don't want to misstep, which is kind of it's kind of a backwards way of thinking about Super Bowl, which is like, let's not screw up versus like, let's take the opportunity and be fun. And I think this is a larger issue, like with journalists too, which is the best experiences I've had in covering Super Bowl is when the marketer and the agency sort of loosen the reins a bit and allow us to talk to the agency about the creative work, allow us to, have some assets ahead of time. So many Super Bowl productions are just so locked down that it's hard for us to get a handle on them until the 11th hour. And by the 11th hour, we're just so inundated with stuff that like we can't really often produce much analysis aside from like a cursory story. So if I had any advice for marketers, I think that fear that comes with obviously the stakes are high. Obviously, there's been examples in culture where messaging has fallen flat or been taken the wrong way or been deemed offensive, which adds to the stress, which adds to the fear. I guess I would say just try to be as open as possible with journalists because, our coverage earlier on can sort of help amplify the message. I think people really want to know, as much as they can about these commercials oftentimes. And like, as early as we can get a handle on what's happening creatively, and just sort of as much access as we can have to the people and the work kind of earlier really helps us because in that time crunch that happens at the end, it becomes very difficult to do that. So I do understand, even the most open and generous like agencies sometimes have trouble convincing their clients to do that. But I think in the end, working with journalists and being more open, I think does amplify the work. So I think it's a good business decision to do that. Agencies like Goodby Silverstein, I think, are really good at that. Like they handle a lot of Super Bowl work, but they do it with like a light touch, and they want to work with us as much as possible. So more clients, more agencies doing that, I think would be really great.
Yeah, and I can say like I've taken the New York Times behind the scenes on set. And even, for Larry David, before contract was signed, talking with journalists off the record about the potential of this partnership and what are thoughts and who's excited by that. And I think everyone is really, really respectful to those on background conversations. Just trust your PR and comms folks to have that conversation. But I think especially y'all in the trades have always, I think, really, really respected that confidentiality of just trying to give as much as possible for those who do give.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we obviously will respect any embargoes, and it's like we're definitely willing to play ball on deadlines and things, and but just having a sense earlier in the game of like what's happening, how whether we can get sort of background info about creative strategy, about the execution. And I totally get that it's another thing to deal with while you're already dealing with so much as a brand. But it's that sort of I feel like it's the media coverage in the end that the earned stuff
Yeah.
goes a long way before the game, after the game. And I think we can we're looking for that. We're looking to serve our readers in that way, and I think it helps the brands too.
And then I can't say this is a scientific take by any means, more eyeball and gut observation. But it seemed like we didn't really see as many like hijacking efforts get covered. Even regional buys were treated more in roundup fashion a few times. I know some trades have openly communicated that like their coverage focus is national ad buys, full stop. So
Yeah.
like how do you think about the big game and what merits priority coverage?
Yeah, I mean, we're mostly focused on the national spots just because of our bandwidth, but I will say from a creative lens, hijacking efforts are sometimes interesting. Sometimes they're a rehash of things that have been done before. But if it does feel new and fresh, I think those things can be worthy of stories. And as far as regional spots, we don't honestly have time to cover a lot of those, but we will occasionally if they are, super interesting. I think a good example was the Reddit 5 second spot from 2 or 3 years ago, ran in New York and some other markets, wasn't national, but really got a lot of attention. Things like that, where the creative is good, the idea is interesting, the execution is interesting. We don't have any hard and fast rule that we're not going to cover regional things. I remember I've covered a few different regional spots over the years just because they've been noteworthy creatively in some way. So I'm basically looking for the best creative. We've even covered some Super Bowl ads that have only appeared on on the Canadian telecast. So like we've definitely kind of gone beyond just the U.S. national broadcast with this sort of thing. Because as you know, at least half, probably more of the national spots are pretty formulaic, and
Yeah.
we'll cover them because because there's this huge investment behind them. They're part of the game. They deserve coverage in that sense, but creatively, they're often not the strongest things in the world. So I'm definitely, even as busy as it can be leading up to Super Bowl, definitely interested in strong creative work, even if it's not a national in-game spot.
And then are there sub criteria that might make something feel more relevant? So, for example, brands that were trying to find a lane amid AB InBev's 33-year run on alcohol exclusivity, which ended in 2022. Do
Mhm.
you foresee more creative experimentation with sponsorship models that have typically forced ad spend commitments early and for several years at a time?
Yeah, I think you mentioned the alcohol thing. I mean, big shifts like that, we're definitely interested in covering. I know John Springer covers a lot of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, the stories, we're definitely looking for trend stories also around Super Bowl. Everyone wants to know like what is it, what's the creative going to look like what's tying it all together, what's in a way it sort of reflects the national mood in a funny way. Like I think, a lot of the big newspapers sort of look for that trend story, and we're looking for it, probably even earlier. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, it's not just at the in-game creative, it's sort of all the market dynamics and category dynamics that kind of go into that. Certainly another point of interest for us is like newcomers, like brands that have never been in the game, agencies that have never been in the game. That's always like an interesting thing. Quality Meats had their first campaign last year. I think Nice and Frank had their first Super Bowl campaign. So like these really small agencies are doing interesting work on the game. So there's definitely a lot of lenses to look through, and we're just trying to sort of serve our readers and like what's going to be interesting for them. And I think there's many storylines that could be interesting. But unfortunately, a lot of the storylines around Super Bowl ads are just very, here's celebrity X and celebrity Y, and they're put into this sort of formula they could be interchangeable with other celebrities, and that unfortunately is just, overtaken the game in the last 5, 10 years, and I have limited sort of patience for that, or just limited time to sort of, really investigate that when it's quite obvious what the strategies are. So I think we're looking for more interesting plays, because what's going to separate the brand in the end is some sort of point of difference on the game, whether it's, superlative creative, or it's maybe an interesting idea, media idea perhaps, that's like comes before the game, like CeraVe did. So yeah, I think we're looking for the most sort of interesting breakthrough approaches, I guess, to the game is probably the best way to put it.
What are your thoughts on balancing co-creation and craft? I'm thinking about like Doritos bringing back their Crash commercial contest are really creators who can do with a level of polish, but then Taco Bell stitching in UEG from their drive-throughs, which didn't have that polish. But, I have to believe that like Sally Jane from Idaho seeing herself for like a second in a national ad, that meant something. And so there is something that we crave, like that cinematic, you've got those big budgets, but again, just for consumers to be a part of and celebrated and seen, and, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I feel like, Crash the Super Bowl was always like a favorite of mine. Like, I feel like that was such a fun idea, getting people involved. It was a different idea. They didn't put so much emphasis on craft. They put emphasis on sort of inclusion. UGC, like really interesting ideas. I thought the Taco Bell thing, while I'm not sure the creative execution last year really was really worked that well. I thought it was a really interesting idea. So I think from my point of view, creatively, like I definitely am looking for different approaches, and anything that kind of takes a risk beyond that formulaic thing we were talking about before, I think is worthy of attention. So even if it doesn't necessarily in the end, another good example was the Rocket thing where they had an in-game spot, but then they sort of organized this live
Thing.
experience in the stadium. Like I've got a lot of respect for that. Like that's, again, I'm not sure. I think Rocket would say it was really successful. I think maybe it was. Creatively, it was just sort of, but it was just sort of interesting and different. Like I think, brands that are willing to try new things on the game. I think that's a pretty admirable thing to do given the investment and the stakes. So yeah, we're always looking for that. And I think Doritos, many years ago when they started Crash the Super Bowl, kind of set the tone for like let's try something differently. Let's not do the necessarily the big budget, big agency approach. Let's try to be more inclusive. And I've always enjoyed that. And it was, honestly, I think it's nice to see that they brought that back.
Right. And kind of have some creative freedom, right? Just let some of the control go. So I'm curious again, husband in the industry, we're chatting this morning and we've talked a little bit about hijacking, but his like kind of huff question was like, well, is it still possible to hijack the big game as a non-sponsor, non-national ad buy? Because my mind goes to what Pop-Tarts has been able to accomplish in the college football playoffs. Coors Light jumping on the MLB moment of Shohei Ohtani smashing some of the LED lights of the digital billboard with that foul ball hit. Something like Oreo Dunk in the Dark is so rare. Uh,
Mhm.
and the things that were coming to my mind of like actual Super Bowl, like I had to go back to like 2021 when Sam Adams did the play with the Clydesdales. So it's like not
Mhm.
lost on me, 127.7 million average viewers reported by Nielsen from this year's matchup. Um, but is there a moment like pick another moment if you're really trying to force it or if you can't really go big?
I suppose. I mean, I think the Reddit thing was kind of in a way a hijacking moment. But yeah, it's the noisiest time of year. So like just by definition, it's harder to break through. There's also just so much paint on the canvas already when it comes to hijacking. Like so many ideas have been done. Like you go all the way back to like Newcastle and when a hijacking moment or Volvo, like when hijacking moments were so well thought out and executed, like those campaigns were. I think we always end up sort of subconsciously comparing to that, and if it's, I think at the same time, I think it can be done probably if you have an interesting idea. I think you talk about, the edible mascot, like that's sort of a big in many ways, a big earned moment. I think earned moments are interesting around Super Bowl if you're not an official sponsor, if you're not an in-game advertiser. Um, if it's done playfully, if it doesn't feel forced, if the idea is cool, I think it's still worth giving it a shot. But it is such a crazy time that just getting that attention can be difficult. But we have our creative roundup and we have plenty of room in there often for cool things, even if they don't merit necessarily a standalone story. So yeah, I guess who knows? Maybe we'll see one this year.
And you kind of hit on this a bit at the top of our conversation, but that like what was once considered regulation for big game plays completely evolved. When we think about GoDaddy working with Walter Goggins or CeraVe with Michael Cera, like, is this the new table stakes? And what does that mean for brands that will never have to make a budget? So if you observe more of an uptick in creative activations like on the ground around the big game? Are we seeing more like in real life exposure plays versus the traditional film or digital? Are we swinging back to analog to kind of counteract where the investment has to be?
Yeah, well, I think one result of something like CeraVe is that, everyone now kind of wants their CeraVe campaign. It's like, like marketers see other brands having success and they sort of want to emulate that. But yeah, it's certainly the investment has to go beyond, the in-game spot. Like I sort of have a fondness for brands that don't pre-release or have any activity ahead of time. I feel like maybe that's a nostalgic point of view. But the majority of them, of course, are doing that, and but I think to me, it's like, does the creative idea merit, an interesting sort of built-out pre-game strategy? I thought what Mischief did with Coors Light last year was really cool. This creative concept of Case of the Mondays, that lent itself to many weeks of sort of different types of activations every Monday leading up to the game. I think 3 or 4 Mondays ahead, they did different types of things, like print out of home was the very first thing with the typo, and then they did a couple videos with Timothy Simons, and they introduced some funny like merch. So I think it's good to remember that Super Bowl season is really a playful time, and like I think creative that leans into sort of fun and being a bit less serious often works really well. But yeah, I think if you talk to most advertisers in the game now, they're very much focused on how to, what should we be doing in the weeks leading up? Like, how can we activate this idea ahead of time? And I think um, hit or miss as far as how that comes across in the end.
Right. And I think to your point, what you bring up is just like the diversity of execution. Like, I think that's where like Mischief like kind of hit it out of the park in the sense of like from that typo billboard to what the actual Super Bowl spot was. You didn't give that away. Like, and having this like slow burn that like entertainment in slow motion is just a different pacing, a very like different, unique, creative approach. And even to follow that up after the game, I think there's a partnership with Peloton
Right.
after. So it was just so many layers and that kind of long tail strategy. So I have a lot of respect for that. And again, for me, with two Super Bowls, DoorDash's debut and FTX, both were not released until game day. And I remember Danny Robinson saying like Super Bowl's like Christmas, and who wants to like open their Christmas present? Like, what's the point if we can't do it? So it's hard, I think, to hold that line with brands, but at the same time, I think yes, campaigns can be successful if you wait until that in-game moment. So just a couple questions left, but again, price tag is around 8 million now for just the ad buy alone. Lots more money to spend on all the other things. So starting to see brands find buddies like Instacart. You foresee more bundling? What's your read on the efficacy of like a brand being able to remain the hero and that standout element in such a high stakes moment? Because I know with Instacart, I just kept going, the Jolly Green Giant. I didn't see the Jolly Green Giant forever and kind of forgot about Instacart in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think that can be a risk for sure. I feel like the Instacart campaign, I thought it was pretty well done, in the end. But yeah, anytime you bring in other IP, I think it's a tricky proposition. I think a lot of brands don't want to do that just for that reason. So I don't know if we'll see a ton more of that than we've seen. I will say that collabs in general are just through the roof across the industry overall because it brings a different flavor. Each brand can sort of draft off the other one's audience and sort of brand voice, which I think creates really interesting creative opportunities. Super Bowl, I just wonder sometimes the politics of, it's difficult enough for one brand to get a Super Bowl over the end line, like two brands working together. I think the classic example is the HBO Bud Light thing from 2019, I think it was. That was, two agencies, two very, very well-respected creative agencies working with their two brands on one in-game spot. Like that's a wild story. But yeah, you don't see too much cross-branded stuff on Super Bowl. Some of it is sort of outside beyond the game, in sort of surrounding activity. But no, I'd be curious to see if we get any more stuff like that this year. I'm not sure.
And then anything I've missed on the front of what creative teams and brands can do to make your job easier when sharing what they're working on around the big game.
It's really just coming in, trying to get Lupus in earlier. Like that time crunch at the end is very difficult, as I mentioned. And I don't know if brands would want to hear this, but like if agencies want to just give us the heads up, or give me a heads up, like we can be, we can treat that information confidentially and just totally respect, embargoes and trying to be on the certain timeline that the brand envisions. So, but if we can, it'd be nice to know as soon as possible, like what the plans are so that we can sort of organize ourselves because it's a very busy month for us too. So, and we also are doing, we're judging A-list and creativity awards around the same time. So for us, it's a particularly busy time. So any help in terms of timing is really great.
And then any tactics or overused celebs you can make a proactive plea to brands to ditch as they plot out what's next.
Well, just the
Manifest
celeb
him.
soup thing. Like I think it's funny because the biggest risk of Super Bowl is blending in, and when everyone's doing the same approach, it just becomes I'm not opposed to celebrities in ads at all. I think, they can certainly work. But just when the celeb just doesn't really have a super great connection to the creative concept, I feel like it's just not, it's difficult to remember after the game who it was for. So, as long as you've got a strong creative idea, then great, have your celebrity, like more power to you. But yeah, just sort of the sort of celebrity soup formula, I think everyone's a little tired of.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like when you've got something like in the time like with FTX and just all the behind the scenes stories, like I think Larry David's manager for creative was saying he gets like around 400 pitches a year
Oh,
of
wow.
like, things to do, and it
Yep.
was the first time he ever said yes. The man he was known for now, right? Like that is like that's a story that's unique, that's amazing.
Yep.
And I think too for even those efforts of just being really transparent, where I think the team jumped on a call and they thought it was going to be like a contract negotiation or talking with talent management, and it was Larry David with a notepad with additional ideas based on like he was ready, so excited. And like
Nice.
again, there are a lot of celebs out there where like they just it's a script. What do you want me to do? Job, pay me money. And like that was not the experience. So like they're just like the stories within the stories I think are really special. And I like encourage teams to like give you a metric ton of info and let you like go wild. So one quick bonus cue. Is there a big game ad from the last few years you were sure would be viscerally received, either positively or negatively, by consumers that didn't hit the way you expected? And why do you think that was?
Um, um, I don't know if I can pull one out of my hat at the moment. I'm trying to think of
Oh, I stumped him. I feel good about this.
yeah, I mean this is like having seen so many.
hmm
Um, I hate to I was expecting more from the Liquid Death commercial last year. I thought that they are such a fun and interesting brand and they do such creative things that the spot to me felt a little bit sort of expected. So if I had to, I respect Andy and those guys so much. I think they do wonderful things, and I'm sure they'd be disappointed to hear me say that. But I felt like when we heard they were in the game, we were like, oh, great, this will be like a creative high point. And I felt like it was maybe like a B.
Got it.
Yeah.
So the big takeaway, come early, be transparent, I mean, maybe like now, today, do it if you can. Folks who know you're going to be really, really busy in the coming months. Tim, again, thank you so much for this conversation. We're going to have to do it again soon. I have a feeling.
Yeah. Great to chat with you, Katie. Thank you for the invite.